I'm going to share our share a screen in the way of introduction. We had the focus of K-12 has been very important to us for a lot of reasons for a lot of time. And Lisa and Jay have been nice enough to devote a good deal of effort in the presentation this evening and putting together their comments. You'll find out why I was particularly pleased that they were willing to share time with us. The focus on K-12 education is not new to our organization. We actually started in December of 2019. At the time, we were still able to have TACI in the tavern at the Cub Club. And at that time, we were talking about education funding, and we had the Des Moines schools and some of the smaller schools also represented, and started to look at some of the silos or the categorical funding that our public schools face. And we followed that up actually in February, I'm sorry, this was actually in February 19th, right, of 2020 with the Des Moines Botanical Center. As part of our annual meeting, we had a focus on education. And we were talking about, are they adequately funded and what's the return on investment? I'm gonna look down here and see if my old friend, nope, he's not here. Anyway, at that time, my friend Brad Buck responded to some of the statistics that had been offered by Mark Jacobs. And he said, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I think a lot of times statistics can be aggravated, disaggregated, however it happens, to make the story. But I'm a firm believer as an engineer and also just as a business person that if we don't measure things, we don't know whether we're heading in the right direction or not. So I'm pushing back a little on Mark Twain's comment, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, because I think they are helpful. We followed that up in the fall of 2020 with a visit by A.J. Crabble from down in Texas. And he was quite specific in saying that outcomes don't change until adult behavior changes. And his thesis was that frequently school boards are playing adult games. They are more interested, I shouldn't say more interested, they are sometimes consumed by administrative issues, by buildings, physical capital, things of that sort. And unfortunately don't spend as much time in the area of measuring outcomes. And I think that was also adopted by, interestingly enough, some of our cities. They said, you know, we maybe need to start looking more at outcomes. And so AJ will be coming back for some work in our area, dealing with school boards and outcomes-based governance. When the governor made her condition of the state address in January, education was very important, and it was highlighted. In the following 2 weeks, we had Cindy, who is a former DMPS school board member. She's a member of the Council of Great City Schools, which AJ is as well. Louisa Dijkstra. Louisa was involved with the Parents for Great Iowa Schools, continues to be, and Mark Jacobs, who I think is also on the line tonight, Reaching Higher Iowa. And they went through the 8 divisions that were comprised in Senate File 159. So education continued to be important. The funding was important. And then we got what I refer to as the helicopter money from the feds. And boy, a lot of it came into the state. And Alan Kemp with the Iowa League of Cities, Phil Jennery with the School Boards Association, and Tom Cooley from the Department of Ed started talking about the amount of money coming into the state. And then we followed that up with Brad and Sarah and Shashank telling us how that's going to affect specifically the Waukee schools and the Des Moines schools. And the thing that came up on that during that conversation was the funding that was coming from the feds was based on Title I. So those schools that had a large population of Title I students got a great deal of funding, and schools like the Des Moines system were the beneficiaries of that. And Waukee, who had relatively little, got smaller funding. And so it was an interesting and informative discussion. Last Wednesday, or 2 Wednesdays ago, David Roederer, who headed the Department of Management for the last 10 years, has been in public life for 38, made a phenomenal PowerPoint, and that will be available after we get a few edits taken care of, starting and ending. But he shared this interesting slide. He was talking about pre-K 12 school funding in the state. So that state aid, this is for the state for fiscal year 22, forecasted at 47%. Local sales, property taxes, 37%. The SAVE, the 1 cent sales tax, about 7 federal, data. So in essence, $7 billion going in, $7.5 billion into education pre-K in Iowa, and per student that's about 15,000. One of the questions that he asked was, bear with me just a second. He noted that 6,000 students are, quote, missing. And in his dry sense, he said, I don't know whether we ought to put out an Amber alert or where'd they go. But 6,000 students at the supplemental aid that the state puts out, you know, that's tens of millions of dollars. And the question will become, are the students coming back? Where did they go? Are they in other school activities, homeschooled, other schools outside the public system? But where indeed are they? So I'd like to welcome our panelists today. The Superintendent of Des Moines Schools, Lisa, has been with us previously. I particularly like her ability to give the facts. She is open to new ideas and implementing many of them. And we're going to talk about the wonderful, I think, the wonderful achievement and recognition of work that they've done in the school system, recently outlined by U.S. News and World Report. Jay Pennington is Chief of Bureau Information and Analysis for the Department of Education, and Jay has a wonderful project going on and is developing a website with a lot of strong information. So I'd just like to, first of all, welcome them. And I'm going to go back and see if I can get me out of this screen share. And Lisa, would you go first and introduce yourself? Give us a little of your background and a few things that interest you outside of the school system.
Sure. Thanks, Art, and thanks for having me tonight, and welcome everyone. So I'm Lisa Remy. I have the pleasure of serving as superintendent for the West Des Moines Community School District. I've been in West Des Moines now. I'm starting my 22nd year, but not all of those as superintendent. When I started my education career, I was in Hudson, Iowa as a high school Spanish teacher. I moved into administration there as a high school principal. And then when I came to West Des Moines, I've served in multiple roles. So an assistant principal at the high school level, I was a middle school principal, associate superintendent for human resources. So I did the HR work. And then about 9 years ago, I decided to take on the superintendent role and was offered that. When I'm not serving students and families here in West Des Moines, things that I like to do my husband and I, and we have one daughter, Emma, she will be turning 29 here shortly. We love water activities. So boating, kayaking, you name it, pretty much, swimming. That's, we love to spend time by the water, and even just sitting and reading a good book near water. It's just for us, water's kind of calming and helps us relax. So that's what we like to do besides taking walks, my husband and I, when I'm home at night and we can do that. So
Lisa, what's the genre of reading you enjoy most?
well, honestly, Art, I do most of my reading is related to work. That's and my daughter, our daughter, always tells me that I should expand my choices. But when I have time to read, I like to make sure I'm staying up on reading to help inform our work here in West Des Moines. So,
well, we're pleased to have you and welcome this evening.
Thank you.
Jay, if you do the same, a little your background and other interests.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate the opportunity to meet you all and present. So I'm Jay Pennington. I'm Bureau Chief of our Bureau of Information and Analysis Services at the department. And I'll get into more of that later. A little bit about me personally. I'm a transplant. I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois. I don't know if you know where that is, but Frank Lloyd Wright, Alistair, what's the rocker? I'm blanking on his name, of course. There's a few notable folks from Oak Park. I have a 15 and 17-year-old, so I'm both professionally and personally invested in seeing world-class schools in Iowa. So spend a lot of time trying to make sure they get home on time, which seems to be the latest thing, right? Summer chaos has ensued in our house. When I'm not chasing them around or at work, I'm a runner, so I run marathons. I think a highlight more recently, was running in the 2014 Boston Marathon. The year after the bombing, so it was really kind of cool to see, sort of the emotion of that day. Finished like 2 hours and 44 minutes, and I've gone faster since. So. Like to, the work of the department, I also like to think of, as a marathon in a lot of ways, right? Like moving a big ship like a bureaucracy to help support schools and report about kind of what's happening in schools. So that's a little bit about me and what I do outside of work.
Jay, how long have you been with the Department of Ed?
I'm just starting, I don't know if it's my 14th or 15th year. So quit some time, actually, all in this role as a bureau chief.
Well, welcome aboard, and we're delighted to have you. I mentioned earlier the recognition that the West Des Moines schools, specifically Valley, got in U.S. News and World Report within the last 2 months. U.S. News does their ranking of colleges, schools. They've got a lot of rankings, and like any, they make certain assumptions. But nevertheless, I think there were 25,000 schools. They were able to rank about 18,000. There just wasn't data, and some of them weren't reporting everything that was necessary. And West Des Moines Valley was ranked one of the 4 schools in Iowa. Interestingly enough, Decorah was ranked the highest. But I started spending some time on the website, and Lisa, first of all, congratulations. The rankings spoke highly of math and reading and college preparedness. Would you share with us your observations and what that means to the system in your district?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Art. And as our friend Dr. Buck said, statistics, sometime, I was sharing with Art that this is where we're at with US News and World Report based on their stats, and we could be somewhere else with another publication. So, but when we saw this, when this came out, we were definitely excited. Glad to see 4th in Iowa and #1 in the metro. And so, as you know, Jay just made a comment earlier. We have great public school systems in the state of Iowa, and I would say some of the best here in the metro area. And so, we're pleased to be among the top in the state, and then #1 in the metro area. When we look at the data and how we ended up where we're at, they look at AP, how many students took an AP exam and then passed an AP exam, which probably all of you know, you get a score of 1 to 5, and passing is really seen as that 3, 4, and 5. They look at the math proficiency, reading proficiency, and graduation rate as well. And then they have a college readiness index that they have. So, when we look at that, it really connects. And I'm going to share, I don't know how easily this will be to see. So hopefully you can see a chart. Are you able to see that, Art?
Yes.
Great. So what I wanted to share is this is part of our strategic plan that we've been working towards, and why I felt this was important to share and how it connects with the ranking that we've received is we really about 4 years ago said we want all students to be post-secondary ready, career ready, and life ready. And we had very specific metrics that we were going to start looking at, not only at the district level, but at the building level as well. And so when you see the metrics under post-secondary, and I want to kind of focus a little bit on the definition because you hear a lot about college and career ready, and we were very intentional not to use the term college because we wanted to expand what post-secondary is and what success can look like. So you can see we talk about students possess skills and dispositions to succeed in post-high school graduation education, internships, whether it's academic, technical, and or experiential. We really wanted to broaden so that we didn't have our students thinking the only way to succeed is college. As you can see in here, our academic indicators, and I'll kind of focus there. One of those is advanced placement courses, and then of course the advanced placement exams as well. So we were intentional several years ago of looking at the number of students who were taking courses, the number of AP courses that we offer, and expanding the offerings, and then as well trying to encourage more students to be taking those courses. We've been successful. We still have work to do. When we disaggregate our data in the demographic level, we're not seeing our student representation in all of our AP classes. We see predominantly white students, and we want to make sure we're seeing and that we're equitable so that all students see that that's a place for them. And the reason why we really focus on the academic indicators that you see here are because those are research-based to show if students have success in those academic indicators, they will be successful in their post-secondary life, whether that's 2-year college, 2-year, 4-year, or going out into the work world. So we've just been intentional as a system to really help students see to take that risk and take those AP courses because there's high level of rigor, and it's okay not to earn an A, right? Like the exposure to that level of content is going to help you beyond Valley High School. So I also, can you now see our portrait of a graduate, Art? Okay, perfect. So along with our strategic plan, we went through a process to determine what are those skills that we really want students to know and be able to do when they leave our system beyond the academic skills. And so those 6 skills of continuous learner, communicator, collaborator, critical thinker, global contributor, and innovator were really important to our school community, both internal and external. And you can see there, our definition of that. And we do break each of those 6 down. But I believe that our focus on the data, as well as our focus on really changing how our classrooms look, and that there's more student talk, student choice, student voice, and less of that teacher-driven stand and deliver type of education, has helped us succeed at our high school and district-wide. When you, and that's, I think, some of the reason why the outcome of the US News and World Report. I'll stop sharing there for a minute. I think it's important to know, for example, the data that they used is from a year previous, but in this past school year, even, with our COVID and some remote, out of the 1,946 students that we had at our high school, we had 916 of them take an AP class. And for example, we had one student that took 9 different classes in her high school career. So if you saw the data, I mean, we have, 8 students who had 4, we have 7 students who took 19. We had 219 students who had 2 AP classes. So we're very fortunate that not only have we encouraged and more students are taking our classes, they're taking multiple advanced placement classes as well. This past school year, we had 25 of our students, our seniors, who graduated with an associate's degree from DMAC prior to graduating from Valley High School. And yeah, it's awesome, Rob. I totally agree. And why I think that's important to share today is because not all, but many of our DMAC classes are also our advanced placement classes. So there are concurrent enrollment classes. Not all are, but many are. And so that just goes to show the opportunities that students have, and that helps them then be successful when they leave Valley High School and graduate. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to all of our teachers and our administrators. I mean, it's also a thank you to them for the work that they do, the support that they give our students and our families, and the support throughout the year with our kids. I'm curious if there's any questions.
I would encourage everybody to use the chat and put questions down as they come to mind. I'll just offer one and then we'll go to Jay. But Lisa, talk about expectations.
Yeah, so, and thanks, Art, for that question. People in our community and in the greater community, they have seen, and we have talked about it, and we embrace that our demographics have changed. What I continue to like to talk about is how our demographics have changed, but our expectations haven't changed. We continue in West Des Moines Community Schools to have high expectations for all of our students. We aren't perfect. We definitely continue to look at our data and reflect and see where those gaps are, and learning that we need to continue to see what's causing those gaps and how can we change. But for example, 1 in 2 students live in poverty in our system now. 1 in 9 students are English language learner students. 1 in 2.5 students identifies as some other ethnicity other than white in West Des Moines. We have 1 in 14 students who are in our gifted and talented program, for example. Before, Art, you mentioned about the Title I funds and ESSER monies. We have 1 in 37 students who receive Title Math and or reading services. And So we did get a larger sum of funds to help support some of the work due to that calculation. And then we have 1 in 9 students who have an IEP in our system. So our IEP students, and that percentage is about 11%. That hasn't changed much over the time, but our free and reduced lunch, every year we have about 100 more ESOL or English language learner students. We're seeing changes within that percentage in the demographics. So I'm really proud of our staff and our system, because as we've changed, our academics have stayed pretty steady. Again, please hear me say, we do have room to grow, definitely have some gaps in our learning. And so we continue to talk about how we can do that. But holding those high expectations for all students, and really bringing that data from our strategic plan to our students, right? Showing them, here's what it takes to be a successful student, to be post-secondary ready, career ready, and life ready. And so really trying to bring that to them and their families as well.
Well, it's well said. Nicely done. I'm going to come back with some other questions a little later, but I want to make sure that Jay has some time here to bring us up to date. We're talking statistics, Jay. We're talking trends, a lot of data. I'm an engineer. I love spreadsheets. So when I dug into some of the U.S. News and World Report, there were some statistics that, I thought were significant. Certainly demographic information, proficiency, all those types of things. So Jay, tell us a little about what you're doing at the Department of Education, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to do a quick drive-by of some of the resources that we have on the department website, and then do kind of a deep dive on just one website in particular. So just a little bit about what the Bureau does and kind of how we fit into the agency as a whole. Our Bureau is the Bureau of Information and Analysis Services. Mainly what that means is we're really the data reporting arm of the agency for K-12. I like to sort of characterize us as sort of the keeper of the scoreboard, if you will. You could certainly argue or use those statistics, as you mentioned earlier, in lots of different ways. We're just trying to sort of provide the facts in most cases. Folks in my bureau work on things like data acquisition. We certainly put out a number of reports. I'll get into some of that. And then, we do some work on, what do those trends tell us? A little bit of what just alluded to about the changing demographics in the state. So one report, and I'll just quickly share my screen, just as an example, is this annual condition of education report. It's like a state level report. It's super dense. It's 250 pages long. It's more of a digest of education statistics. And I don't want to make you dizzy here, but I'll just go to the sort of table of contents so you can get a sense of the breadth of what is in here. So, information on enrollment, educators, student performance, enrollment trends, projected enrollments. We do that both at the state level as well as, for every school district. Art, you just mentioned 6,000 missing kids. We fully anticipate, and by the way, that's about $48 million to the state. And really what Dave was referring to was just the decrease in enrollment from year to year. It might take a couple of years for that to rebound. Certainly it depends on the pandemic, but and kind of what those numbers look like. But I would assume in 2 years, we're going to see, we'll be at least back to where we were before. That 1 year dip was after 16 years of continued increases. So just an example of some of the data. Certainly information around subgroups, students eligible for free or reduced price lunch, early childhood, a lot of really good information on educators, taking a look at teacher, principal, and superintendent salaries across the last decade, just as an example. We get into, key courses such as advanced placement, percent of students that are taking physics or a world language. So just a tremendous amount of info in that state level report. We've also put it online, and we don't have the same sort of breadth of content yet, but we do have an online version of that report. So you can take a look at Des Moines or West Des Moines, take a look at the state, and, kind of what that, what the characteristics look like for any particular school district. And so taking that state level trend and really localizing it so you can take a look at how the state compares to any particular district. So we're trying to make that condition of ed report interactive. One last report that I'll mention really quickly is this closing achievement gap report that we put out every year. It really focuses on, in this particular case, the first piece is the changing demographics, right? So in 2000, 2001, 90% of the student population in Iowa was white. Roughly, 20 years later, we've gone to 1 in 4 students in Iowa as a student of color. So we get into information like that. And another stat that I like to highlight is, about 10% of school districts, including West Des Moines, educate 52% of the student population. So we've got 327 school districts. 90% are educating less than half of our student body. So huge disparity in the types of schools and some of the challenges that those schools have. This report doesn't just focus on like the shifting demographics, but it also takes a look at, like what the achievement gap looks like for students of color compared to, white students in the state. What are the percent of students that are reading at benchmark compared to, their counterparts? So a lot of, again, tremendous information in this report. So that's just a quick drive-by on some of the other kind of reports, but I'm going to go specifically into sort of a deep dive on our website called the Iowa School Performance Profiles. This website itself meets, both state and federal reporting requirements. So the Every Student Succeed Act requires us to have accountability for all schools, and it helps. Funding and identification is driven off of 2 needs: one, to identify a list of what's called comprehensive schools, which are the lowest, at least in our index, right? U.S. News and World Report has their own identifying those that are excelling. In this case, the Every Student Succeeds Act, federal law, wants us to identify the lowest performing schools in the state of Iowa. And in this case, this is considered comprehensive. We also have to identify a second tier of schools, and those are called targeted schools. And really what that means is that there's one or more student group that's struggling. And I'll talk a little bit and show you what the results sort of look like statewide in a little bit. The last little piece is a attendance center rankings requirement. It's a state level requirement that requires, again, accountability for all schools. And it requires us to create a rating category for each school. On the high end of the continuum, you have exceptional schools, high performing schools, and on the low end, you have priority schools. In this case, priority and comprehensive are the exact same set of schools. We've had 5 releases of the website. I'm going to show you, really dig into it in a minute, actually show you the site. We're going to have a release with the latest information from the spring 2021 administration that'll come out late fall and winter. Also, just somewhat related, I just thought I'd mention it. We just recently received the preliminary results from the spring administration. So in the coming weeks, there'll be new additional information coming out from the department around how the state did as a whole for spring 2021. So that's an aside, just something to kind of look forward to. On the ISPP, the Performance Profiles website, we have sort of two categories of data. So there's a lot of information on this website. We have what's called learning measures. Those measures are measures that really provide, they contribute to an overall school score for every school in the state. So things like average achievement in a school, things like what's called conditions for learning. That's a student survey that is given annually that focuses on like safety. Do kids feel safe at school? Do they feel engaged? Those kinds of questions. There's a specific measure that looks at the percent of students that are English learners and are they making progress towards English language proficiency. Graduation rate, growth information. So did a kid exceed their growth expectation year to year? Participation rate, did kids overall participate in assessments? English language progress, that's a typo because I already mentioned that. Lisa mentioned post-secondary readiness and some of the work that they're doing in West Des Moines in terms of how they're measuring that. There's also a measure within the accountability calculation, which has some of the same elements that Lisa showed, but some differences, and then proficiency rates. So these data, in essence, sort of contribute to a school score. On the other end, we have other sort of required reporting elements. I like to sort of think about this as important data that certainly contributes to learning in school, but we haven't put it in sort of the accountability bucket, but it's really important contextual information. Things like chronic absenteeism. What are the percent of students in a school that miss 10% or more of their school year? So 180 days, right? They're out for 18 or more learning days, basically. Things like we've got educator effectiveness. You're the Taxpayers Association, so certainly things like school finance, money are of interest. We have a school district report card, and we also have, it's not on here, but we also have a school level expenditure report that shows information about expenditures in every school in Iowa. So here's just a quick version of some of the measures on the site. We have there's a range of scores. While there's a theoretical 0 to 100, this doesn't sort of follow an A to F. It's not 90 and above. It's created differently. But here's sort of the range of scores that a school would need to have to be, an exceptional school is 66.3 and above, just as an example. Not going to go into a lot of details. By the way, I have like an hour and a half version of this, and I know I only have 20 minutes, so I'm moving relatively quickly. But basically, each of the accountability measures aren't weighted equally. Like, so as an example, in our discussions and sort of design around the system, you get into these conversations of, should graduation be worth as much as participating in assessments, right? Like, those are the kinds of conversations. And at the end of the day, sort of theoretical place that we landed was we believe that student growth, the ability of a kid to, meet that growth expectation, is the most important component to the system, and so it's weighted as such. On every school webpage, you're going to actually see the performance detail, which, here's the sort of what we're calling a raw score. And so in this particular case, 99.59% of students participated in the English language arts assessment. So therefore, a school gets 5 points. So it's basically our quick way, without going into too much detail, of how we would calculate this overall score, which would then determine the rating. I'm just gonna, I could go on, but I'll just jump over to the site itself and just provide a quick overview. So when you land on the site, there's going to be a COVID sort of message. This web page actually shows you what data are available and what data aren't. Because of the schools closing on March 16th of 2020, we weren't able to have a spring assessment, the 20 assessment administration. So important measures like that weren't available in the 20 version of the performance profiles. So I'm going to focus on the 2019 to give you a full sort of overview. So there's a state level summary, a district level summary, and then a school level summary. So again, here's the learning measure drop down. You can click on, post-secondary readiness. I could go into each of these pages in a lot of detail. I won't do that. But what this shows you is at a state level, in this particular design, what we're looking at is kids participating in some kind of college assessment. So what is the percent of students that participated in the ACT or SAT? Did they get a minimum score? It's 24 or above on the ACT, and then, a similar score on the SAT. What percent of students participated in this case, as CTE concentrators? Did they take enough CTE courses to be considered a concentrator? And or did they take some type of advanced placement, baccalaureate, IB courses, or concurrent enrollment courses? So that's sort of packaged into a score for each school. This is the state level version of that. So this is kind of what the state report looks like. I'm actually going to, unless somebody wants me to look at a particular district, I'm gonna, my wife's cousin is the superintendent of Albia, and I've asked his permission, Kevin Krall is a great guy, to use his district often in these demos. So unless you want me to, I'll stop, and this is the audience participation part of the presentation.
Go right ahead, Jay.
Okay, so this gives a quick little bit of information. Kevin Krall is the superintendent, what the enrollment is, the grade levels that are being served, a little bit of demographic information about the school district, and then the performance in those accountability areas. And then these diamonds sort of represent whether or not they're above or below the state average. And then we also have, so we have the accountability view, and then we have what's called an in-depth view. And so just expanded information about not all kids are included in an accountability calculation. So a kid needs to be enrolled sort of continuously for at least half a year or more in order to be included. The reason for that is for districts that have a lot of high mobility, the kid that shows up, a day before the assessment, has that school district really had a fair amount of time to be responsible for the education of that kid? So that student would show up next year in accountability. And then at the bottom, you've got, the list of each school and then what rating category they're in. So I'm going to click on Albia High School. When you click on this, you're going to get, the principal, enrollment information. You get demographic information here. Here's the overall score. And then you get these every student succeeds ACT performance. So if this school was comprehensive, it would list that. If they were targeted or if they had a particular student group that was struggling, that would say targeted. You can click here to get a little bit of trend information. So in 2018, this was a commendable school. They increased to become a high performing school the next year. Another sort of key thing that we have here is this achievement gaps component. So you can not only look at the overall performance of all kids in the school, but you can also, if they've got enough students, so it's 20 or more students in this particular school, then you can take a look at the performance of subgroups, and you can compare that performance to all kids in the school or all kids in the state. So that's, I think, an important element. The last thing, so again, you can click on any of those areas. The per pupil expenditures is a new area. You can click there and then find out, it gives you information about the, percent average daily attendance, percent of students that are, students with disabilities. Certainly that drives expenses, particularly if you have, students with disabilities that have higher levels of need. So that's always an important consideration, as well as the average age of the educator workforce in that building. That certainly influences, things like salary. You can get an average, cost for personnel expenditures, non-personnel expenditures, the combination of both state and local expenditures, how much is federal, and then sort of that total per pupil expenditure. There's also some resources. We've got a fact sheet. There's some videos that you can hear me go on and on about other features. We have this technical guide. So if you really want to sort of dig in and understand more about how we come up with an overall score for every school, this is a resource that provides that level of detail. The last thing I'll just highlight, two things. One is you can download this data as well. So if you're interested in, a spreadsheet of all schools or a particular school, you can click through here. If you only want, percent proficient, you can create a data set just within a couple of seconds here that will give you literally every school district and every school and the percent of students that are proficient in that school. So here's that breakdown. The last thing I will mention is some of this comparison, which is Mark provided some, I think, valuable feedback and things about putting together both a comparison chart and a comparison search. So back to Albia, if you wanted to find schools that were like Albia High School, but based on demographics, so you want, plus or minus 10% of enrollment, maybe you want within 10 plus or minus 10% of free reduced price lunch, and click submit, you're going to find 27 school districts in the state that meet that sort of likeness based on those demographics. So that's a feature. So if you wanted to compare, you could take a look at some more objective things like that. Let's say you wanted to make it, all right, well, 10% is kind of wide. Let's make it, within 5% of each of those. You can, now there are 10 schools. And then if you click this school performance details tab, you can now see, okay, based on the other 9 schools, what did their overall scores look like? How did I do as that principal in relation to some of those other like schools? I love, being sort of a stats person, scatter plots are, something that I enjoy. Others hate them. So I don't know what camp you fall into. But we also tried to provide some visualization as well as in terms of how particular schools fared. So in this particular case, when you fall and then you can toggle this full screen, on the y-axis, you get student count, and on the x-axis, you get the overall school score. And, we purposely put this out here because there's sort of no relationship in terms of how big your school is related to how well you did on this index, if you will. So this was sort of purposefully landed here. Now you can do things like, all right, I want to group this and visually look at it based on the rating category. And because, on the x-axis, you have the overall school score, you can see it sort of breaks into these colorations. So you can take a look at, and you can select and unselect, who those, so if you want to just look at priority schools, you can do that. And then you can kind of hover over each of these schools and get a little bit of information around who those schools are. So you can, do that. You can also take a look at, all right, I want to take a look at who all the exceptional schools are, right? So that's just an example of some of the features. You can take a look at, all right, I want to only look at comprehensive schools. I want to take a look at or highlight a particular school on the scatter plot. So this is listed. So you can also locate a particular school as well. So that's a really quick version of some of the information on the school performance profiles. The last thing I'll just touch on, Art, you mentioned, what are some of the trends that you've seen? So I'll show a little bit of what we have, sort of the distribution within the 2018 and 2019 version. So you can see here, there was just a slight downward, so 2% more of schools fell sort of below, into the below half, and from the upper half. At the same time, you did see an increase in the number or the percent of schools that are commendable. So this is a little bit about the percent of schools falling into each of the rating categories, and then at the bottom, the number of schools in each rating category. On the federal identification end, we had in 2018, 149 schools that were considered targeted. So, students with disabilities or Hispanic students fell below that lowest 5% cut point. In 2019, a slightly smaller group, so we had fewer targeted schools. So 8 more schools kind of were no longer targeted based on that 2019 version of the report. And this is kind of how it fell out based on student group. So when we think about targeted status, it's one or more student groups falling below that 5% cut point. And in 2019, the number one reason a school is targeted is for students with disabilities. And in this case, 58, almost 59% of schools that were identified for that. And that fell down to 54% in the 2019 version. For Black or African American, of the schools eligible, 56 schools, or 47%, were identified for that subgroup. Well, that dropped down to 22%. So you can see some, schools overall, sort of 2% fell into sort of the lower half. There was a lot of progress in the second year in terms of the reason schools were identified for targeted status. So I said a lot, and I tend to move quickly. What questions do you have?
First of all, Jay, thank you. You gave us an immersion, a lot of data there. If you would provide me with the links, Jay, to those websites and the reports. Fascinating data. And I think, when we talk about public funding, our association wants to make sure that things are funded adequately, accurately, but we're equally concerned about the return on that investment. And I think what we're finding out is you've got some great data that is starting to indicate what is successful. I think we can start to find out those schools that are high performing, and maybe there should be an effort to share those practices more widely. It's all about continuous improvement, right? What are some of the questions? Open it up. Lisa, any observations? Did you learn anything as a superintendent?
No, I was aware of all of that data. There's a plethora of data there. And as Jay pointed out, the financial piece is relatively new. So I haven't gone in and compared financial, but I have gone in and used the comparison chart for, how do some of our schools, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, compared to others who have like demographics that we do. That's really helpful information.
One of the interesting pieces on the U.S. News evaluation, and when you start to drill down there, they talk about the student-teacher ratios. And boy, that I was hoping there would be some clear trend in that, but I just didn't see any. Jay, do you have any thoughts on that? What do the data seem to indicate about? I was always of the impression, although I had 30 in my Roosevelt school days in a classroom, that the lower that ratio, the more teachers, I should say, per student, whatever. If you had 9 students per instructor, that was better than 15 students per instructor. Is that kind of data available on your website?
So we do at a state level have student-teacher ratios, we don't have classroom level information. That's kind of a mixed area, to be honest, right? Like you can, I came from University of Chicago, was where I worked prior to coming to Iowa. There was a professor there at the time that was sort of immersed in that literature. And you can find good analysis on both ends, saying, the that the quality of the teacher is really the most important influencer, not necessarily the number of students that are in the classroom. So that's not something that we have. The classroom ratios isn't something that we have other than the K-3.
Question here from Ken Smith. Data was great, but I didn't see any data about single parents or why the students are underperforming. What kind of, is there any data? Is a single parent household? Is there any data on that? I think it's pretty granular.
So census information would have that. That's not something the department collects, or, you know, one of the tough things that we have, we've got a lot of people saying, well, why don't you collect X or why don't you collect Y? And, you know, what, even if we believe that that's an important piece, we've heard sort of loud and clear from the legislature that you shouldn't sort of exceed your authority. So we literally on all our reports we cite the authorities for collecting that piece of information, and that's not one that we have any authority to collect. Certainly it's an important piece, right? Like there's data, you know, out there that shows, you know, things like mother's educational background is a huge influencer in terms of, you know, how students do. Is that the only piece? Absolutely not. But there's other data out there that, again, that's not something that the Iowa Department of Ed has, but sort of citing information that comes out from the National Assessment of Student Progress, which is a federally required assessment.
I see Senator Celsi on the line again this evening. Claire, welcome. Always good to have you.
Hi, Art. Thanks for allowing me to listen in.
I'm absolutely impressed with what Jay and the Department of Education are mining. Your observations?
My observations are that it's all good data. There is some pretty significant data, Art, from years and years and years of research on classroom size, actually. That's an extremely important element, especially in the younger grades. And then you always have to look at the effects of education funding cuts, which have really taken many, many more adults out of the schools, not just in the classroom. They've taken, you know, administrators, nurses, librarians, all the support staff that is so essential, you know, to a child being able to ground themselves in learning from a young age. And then classroom associates have also been taken away, guidance counselors, you name it. So I just think that's, even if we did have those statistics, it would be deceiving because we have so many fewer hands-on adults in the buildings now. So, and that's honestly, you know, when you raise the funding 2% and your costs go up 3% year after year, you know, it's the only thing that really comes out of that is people. And I think we're about as skinny as we can get in most of our districts. And I'm for one, I'm very thankful for the generous federal funding. And I think it was targeted appropriately to the students who need it the most. And I would also add that one of our richest districts, West Des Moines, Iowa, has a growing English language learner population, but that reflects statewide numbers. Statewide, our students are 25% persons of color at this point. So we have to really buckle down and get more ELL funding out. This year, we increased it by about $75,000, which was just simply insulting, in my opinion. So those are my thoughts. But I mean, Lisa, I admire you so much. She's gone through so much this year, and she's a star as far as I'm concerned as superintendents go, but there are many, many other superintendents that are just as dedicated as she is, and just rolled with the punches this year. So thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate that. Any other comments before we give our two panelists an opportunity to make closing comments? again, we've recorded this and we'll make it available. A lot of data and a lot of good information. Jay, anything you want to leave us with? That shows you my poor English skills. That was a preposition with which you'd like to leave us.
Well, I guess I'll say just on the performance profile, there is a rich set of data, but I think context really matters, and sort of understanding, going beyond what the numbers say to really understand, what's kind of happening in that building. And so I think it is a really useful tool to sort of create and start conversations, but needs to be in terms of context of, what are the school improvement activities that the district or school building is focused on. In our, as Lisa mentioned, right, like there's definitely work to do, even for, districts that are underperforming, schools that are performing at a high level. So I think context matters.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, thanks, Art. I guess what my closing comments would be, we've focused really on academic data today, and that's really important. But the other side of it that helps increase that academic data are the relationships that our adults, whether that be our bus drivers, teachers, administrators, custodians, have with our students, as well as the social emotional piece needs to be attended to and is being attended to in many of our schools across the state. But that, if we don't attend to that, it becomes harder to realize the academic gains. And so we need to, how do we take the time within our limited time that we have? I mean, we have kids, for 1,080 hours in a school year, but there's a lot to be done, and so how do we make sure that we're attending to those social emotional needs so that kids can access the quality learning that we have and the standards that we have, and then exceed. So thank you.
Well, our thanks to you. Goodness, I hope I haven't overlaid this, but I certainly agree with Claire. Lisa, your observations, your continuous observation, effort and continuous improvement and expectations, it's just refreshing. And Jay, congratulations on the work you're doing. I think it is important to be able to measure successes and to try to duplicate them more broadly. So my thanks to both of you. We're going to get into cities, municipalities 2 weeks from now. We're going to follow that with some of the other organizations that drive taxpayer, that utilize taxpayer money. Rob and I were just sharing and exchanging comments. We're going to have DMAC, DART, some of the others. And then we're going to take a look at the end of August on some of the property tax statements that we're getting so that we can see exactly what the collections, how they've changed from one year to the next. Again, we're not an anti-tax organization. We just want to make sure that things are being effectively and efficiently, that those funds are being effectively and efficiently deployed. And then we're going to start into a series of forums. School boards are up for re-election this year. A lot of seats. I don't know, Lisa, how many in West Des Moines?
And we have 3 seats open and we don't have any incumbents running. So.
And I understand in Des Moines, there could be as many as 5.
Yeah, I don't know, Art.
I mean, it's amazing. So Cindy Elsben, who is on here, is going to be working with us on developing some questions and some ways to look at school board candidates. Cindy, are you getting fired up for that?
Yeah, I am, Art. Thank you. Yeah, and you're right. There's 5 seats that will be up for election in the Des Moines School Board. But we'll be working with you on doing some student outcomes focused education for school board candidates and for community members, and then developing questions for candidate forums to follow that.
We're lucky to have Cindy and she and AJ Crabble, who I referenced earlier. They actually were just up in Alaska working as a team with school improvement and outcomes based in Minnesota. It's a great organization. So Cindy, we appreciate your work, and again, our association wants to be part of the solution, just not the problem. So we'll be getting the school board, and Cindy, that's 5 out of 7.
5 out of 7. Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Think of the importance of that election.
Yeah.
And then we're also going to be involved with school board city council elections and the other off year as well. So with that, I thank you all for joining us. Again, we'll make the website information available, and look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Be safe, and we'll see you then. Enjoy the summer.